Prophecies foretell a world government will be established and in power when Jesus returns to the earth. One effort to scare everyone into compliance to this world governing body is the global warming climate change scam. We will discuss the truth behind the hoax on today's edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you for joining me on Tuesday's edition of End of the Age. Now, I'm going to be talking today about climate change. We'll get to that in a moment. But I've been watching a lot of these political debates. Obviously, in just a few days, we'll have the midterm elections. Been watching a lot of political debates, and man, the candidates couldn't be more polar opposites. I mean, you've got abortion on demand, LGBT, immigration, or should we build a wall or shouldn't we? Freedom of speech for churches, and then, of course, climate change. Listening to these debates, I'm thinking, man, some of these people are for it. Some of them are totally against it. Who do we vote for? I mean, I'm sure you've been asking yourself these questions and making sure you vote for the right candidate. And the thing is that candidates, like I said, are diametrically opposed on these issues. I just watched a debate the other night. I won't tell you who it was, but they were going back and forth on climate change. One person was saying, well, look, I believe in climate change, but I just don't believe humans are inducing from global warming, which leads to climate change. And the other person was saying, no, the science is settled. There's climate change, global warming, which leads to climate change. And they were just hammering this other person. And I thought, man, this one guy really doesn't understand what's going on. So knowing that we're going into the midterms, I wanted to kind of clear up something about global warming, climate change. We've done it many times on the program, but some of the information I'll give you today you've never heard of before. And so I want to make sure you know the issues going into the midterms and even 2020. You've got to understand the issues to know, hey, what kind of America do I want to live in? Who should I vote for? Who do we want to put in office making these very influential decisions? So one of the issues that we're talking about is, or I should say a non-issue, it all depends on the truth, that I want to discuss today is the global warming climate change hoax. And I'm saying hoax because that's exactly what it is. And before the end of the program, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But we hear it so much in the news. We're getting fed this fear factor situation where they're sensationalizing this propaganda that's put out by the United Nations saying, hey, there's the human-induced emissions that are putting off so much CO2 in the air. We are causing the planet to warm, and we need a world governing body or more government to oversee this and to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions we're putting off in the air and control the temperatures, like we could do that, and kind of keep global warming, climate change in check. They think that something we could do could reduce the hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that. And so it's all humanistic solutions. So it's a hoax, everybody. Now, some of you might be saying, well, okay, Dave, hold on a minute. Are you a climate change denier? Actually, my answer is no. I mean, if you think about it, the climate has changed ever since the dawn of time, and it always will change. Every single day, the temperatures are going to go up, down, it's going to rain, it's going to be windy. I mean, the climate's always changing. However, I will say that I'm a denier, a skeptic, a critic, a cynic, a dissenter, a non-believer, and a questioner of the propaganda that human-induced global warming is leading to that climate change. Now, that's the big difference, and that's what we want to clear up on the program today. So, my question is, why does the media and many politicians keep pushing this false ideology, this propaganda? And there is an answer that you need to know, understanding it going into the midterm election 2020, all these officials that we're contemplating putting in office, and what's really going on behind that. You need to make an educated decision. Make sure you understand the issues before you vote. So we don't vote candidates per se, we vote issues. That's the most important thing. So the first question, just recently there was a 60-minute interview between Donald Trump and Leslie Stahl. I'm going to go through that. I know I'm coming up to a break, so I don't want to cut this in half. So we'll hold right here. But when we get back from the break, I'm going to go into a little bit of the 60-minute interview between Leslie Stahl and Donald Trump. And the first question she hits him with are, do you think climate change is a hoax? Well, why? Why would she do that? And why are they constantly hammering the Trump administration and different people on climate change?
Many Christians admit end-time Bible prophecy is very complex and difficult to understand, and for some, a little bit scary. But what if you could understand Bible prophecy? What if you could know what will happen and how the United States will play a key role during end-time events? When you call today and get Understanding the End Time DVD curriculum, you can have peace about what is to come while understanding the prophetic events that appear in our headlines every day. When you call or go online to endtime.com and order, you'll learn the answer to the biggest prophecy question of all. Will the rapture take place, and when will it happen? This 14-part DVD series is the definitive end-time prophecy Bible study available. And for this limited time, you can get it for just $149. Don't miss this special offer. Understanding the End Time. Call now. 1-800-363-8463. That's 1-800-END-TIME. Or go to endtime.com today.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel and her people. We would like to thank Endtime for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We marvel at your team keeping the time schedule, keeping everyone comfortable, the wonderful driver, the brilliant guide, the entire tour program, good hotel choices, and stellar food. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter, listen to his current teachings, and had some interesting questions answered so eloquently. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia.
Join Irvin and Judy Baxter May 2nd through the 17th, 2019 for the ultimate Israel tour experience with a Greek island cruise. Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 to sign up today.
So many of you will remember the recent interview between Leslie Stahl from 60 Minutes and Donald Trump. And they covered many things, but right out of the gate, she comes at Donald Trump with a question about climate change. She said, do you still think that climate change is a hoax? Well, President Trump said, well, I think something's happening, something's changing, and it'll change back again. I don't think it's a hoax. Which, like I said before, I don't believe climate change is a hoax. Donald Trump says, I think there's probably a difference. I don't think, he said, I don't know that it's man-made. Now, that's the difference right there. He said, I will say this, I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs. I don't want to be put at a disadvantage because that's what the Sustainable Development Goals and a lot of different things we're doing. We were supposed to give all kinds of money. Donald Trump says, I'm not going to do that. And Leslie Stahl said, well, I wish you could go to Greenland, watch these huge chunks of ice just falling into the ocean, rising sea levels. And the president said, well, and you don't know whether or not that would have happened with or without man. You don't know. Leslie Stahl said, well, you're scientist. And he said, no. He said, we have. And she said, well, hold on a minute. The National NOAA and NASA. And he said, well, we have scientists that disagree with with what they've come up with. And she said, well, you know, I was thinking that if we said, no, I've seen the hurricane situations and I've changed my mind, that really is climate change. And I thought, wow, what an impact that would have. And Donald Trump said, well, I'm not denying climate change. There are hurricanes, there are tornadoes. He said, I'm not denying that. She said, well, what an input that would make. In other words, if you said, hey, I believe in global warming, climate change, and would do something about it. Donald Trump said, I'm not denying climate change. And I'm not either. Dave Robbins, sitting here today in 2018, I don't deny the climate's changing. Like I said, it has from the time God created the earth. But Donald Trump said, but it could very well go back. You know, in other words, it might be warming a little bit now, going back to cooling. We don't know. He said, you know, we're talking over millions of years. And she said, but you're saying you're denying it. And he said, no, it's happened over millions of years. They say that we've had hurricanes that were far worse than what we've just had with Michael. And she said, well, who says that? Who's the they? Donald Trump said, well, people say that and she said, she cut him off. She said, yeah, but what about the scientists who say it's worse than ever? Donald Trump said, well, you'd have to show me the scientists because they have a very big political agenda, Leslie. She said, well, I can't bring them into this interview. And he said, well, look, scientists have a political agenda. Well, of course, President Trump is right. And that's going to be the gist of my program, is that political agenda. So when there's a humongous political agenda behind the global warming climate change scam. And if you watch these debates and the person that says, well, I'm not a denier of climate change, I just don't believe it's human-induced climate change, the ones who have the political agenda will try to hammer back on them and say, well, hold on a minute. Then you're wanting to burn the planet up and, the oceans are going to rise and flood the United States and all this other stuff. That simply is not the case. It's a political agenda that's driving the propaganda. And so this is only one issue that's talked about in these political debates. But if you're making a really good decision on who to vote for and looking forward, let's say in 2020, different things, you need to understand the big picture of the agenda behind all of this, and it ties in to Bible prophecy. So let's talk about the global warming climate change scam. We've talked about this many times on the program, but before we're done today, I'm going to share some things with you that you haven't heard before on the program. Some scientists, and very renowned scientists, and what they say about global warming climate change, but it's not put out in the New York Times and the USA Today and the Washington Post, things like that. So we're going to talk about that before we get done. So here's the deal. This is very important that you understand this, because the propaganda, the scam, is the fear factor, the scare tactics being used. The oceans are going to rise and flood everything, and we're going to burn the planet up, and we're destroying humanity, and people just hunker down and say, oh my goodness, what do we do? Well, their solution is bigger government to manage all of this. That's the goal at the end of the day. So here's the deal. Fear is an emotion caused by the threat of danger. We all know that. For thousands of years, fear has been used by pharaohs, kings, monarchs, emperors, the caliphates, even presidents, politicians, and even religious leaders to enslave the populace. Over time, the process has been refined, but the objective has never changed. It's all about control. If you can get a certain body of people in a fear mode, you can get them to pretty much do anything in the name of security. So in today's society, the concept is simple, and it's been extremely successful, honestly, I'm sad to say. But rather than just tell people the truth, you got to sensationalize and make it out. Let's get everybody scared to death, and then we'll just, we'll say, hey, the solution is a bigger government or a world government. Now, that's what we're seeing going on here. And so the ideology behind all this, the propaganda is, let's promote a crisis, whether it's real or imagined, it doesn't matter, which creates fear among the people. You got to keep them in a constant state of fear mode, and they'll pretty much be led along like lost sheep. And once that's established, then we declare that government oversight, gross taxation, surveillance, increased regulation, that's the only solution that there is. And if people are scared enough, they'll buy into that. They'll yield up their sovereignty to this a government or a global government eventually. Now, that's what we're talking about because that's what's prophesied in Scripture. But this is, if you stand back and look at the big picture, that's what's going on. So you see, the goal all along is greater dependency on the government as the citizen's protector, provider, the manager of all of this. The problem is it leads to more control. That's the goal. The crisis is used by a president, a politician, a religious leader, just as a means to an end. And consider what we're talking about today. Now, there have been many things used throughout time. The pharaohs, they actually claimed to be gods, and they would talk to people about the afterlife. And there was all kinds of scare tactics used throughout time. Obviously, the pharaohs were not gods, and they had no control over somebody's afterlife. But yet they use that as a scare tactic to control the people. Well, consider the global warming climate change hoax that's being promulgated in the world today. I just watched a political debate the other night, and these guys were going back and forth on, you're a climate change denier. No, I'm not a climate change denier. I just don't believe it's human-induced, which is what the United Nations is saying. And so there's a big divide here. And you and I both know it's one of the divides. But the global elites around the world are spreading the deception to their people that, because this is the message being given by the United Nations, that mankind has caused the surface of the planet to increase in temperature due to greenhouse gases, or i.e. carbon dioxide, etc., that humans are emitting. And they warn that if this continuous, that if it continues unchecked, that the planet would experience rising sea levels, increased rain and snowfall, more damaging wildfires, heat waves, health risk. Everything imaginable, droughts, hurricanes, declining fresh water supplies, floods that are going to threaten our infrastructure, bridges coming down, agriculture, transportation, and the air quality. Now, that's the crisis that's being sold. Humans are causing that, so there needs to be a human body that's put over everybody that manages that. Okay, so that's the spin. Well, only this time, the agenda is not to activate greater reliance on a national government to help their people, things like that, because you can't control a flood. You can't control a drought. Something like that. Come on. God controls that stuff. So at the end of the day, it's very important that we know what's going on. The global warming or climate change it's considered a universal problem, because the airflow doesn't stop at the borders. So they say, well, this is a universal problem. So we all breathe the same air. We share the same water. We rely on the same dirt to produce our food. And therefore, the solution must be an international authority or a world government. And yeah, that's right. The global warming crisis was created for one single purpose, And that was to establish a world governing body that will control the lives of every single person on the planet. Now, and that's where it ties into Bible prophecy. Now, as far as the global warming, climate change, let's talk about them scaring us into accepting a world government, because that's what's going on. And the fact of the matter is that climate, like I said before, the climate change is not a hoax. You say, well, I thought you guys believed it was a hoax. No. Actually, the climate has changed, like I said, every day since God created the earth. Today it may be sunny and 70 degrees. And tomorrow it might bring rain and drop into the 50s. Well, bingo, the climate just changed. And it's been doing that every day since time began. Now, many politicians and scientists claim that, and this is the big difference here, politicians, scientists, they all claim, or many of them I should say, not all of them, they claim that carbon pollution or carbon dioxide, CO2, many of you, if you remember through biology class, is heating up our planet, which is resulting in an increase in droughts, floods, wildfires, the future of our children. I mean, I've seen it where it's the most horrible future that you can imagine. However, there's an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that has been given over the years totally disproving the theory of man-made global warming. If you listen to the media, your nightly news, they would think everybody on the planet and all the scientists believe in this theory of man-made global warming. It's simply not true. For decades, global elitists have been spinning tales of an impending ice age or a catastrophic global warming in an effort to keep the masses in a perpetual state of fear. But now that global cooling and global warming have been so easily disproven, sure, the planet's been cold at one point and it's been heating up, but it has nothing to do with man giving off CO2 emissions out of my Ford pickup truck that I drive. It has nothing to do with that. And so it's been easily disproven. Politicians and their on-staff scientists, notice I said on-staff scientists, have resorted to promoting fear of man-made climate change. And now they can blame every hurricane, earthquake, drought, flood, snowstorm, and on human beings. There were people that blamed Hurricane Harvey down here in Houston. It rained 5 foot in just a few days, 60 inches of rain. They blamed that on global warming and climate change. So I'm saying we've got to wake up, everybody. I mean, God has been regulating the temperatures of this planet for thousands of years. Notice that this global warming, climate change ideology is humanistic. Humans are causing it, so humans need to manage it. But folks, God has control of all of this. They've taken the God factor out because there's certain people that want control. So they had to come up with this scam to scare everybody. So the very idea that a government entity can control the weather or the temperature of the planet by regulating the amount of CO2 that we emit into the air, that's preposterous. I mean, let's just be honest. Let's tell the truth. So what are the realities here? Is global warming man-made? And if it's not, why are politicians, world leaders, scientists, and global dreamers, people that are wanting this world governing body, why are they continuing to lie about this? Why the scam? Well, number one, is global warming man-made? We need to talk about that. Very, very important. Because like I said, if you're watching your nightly news, you're going to get fed that to where you can't even walk to bed. And we need to talk about that. So, is global warming man-made? The entire global warming climate change theory hinges on the premise that humans, through the emissions of greenhouse gases, mainly CO2, are causing the temperatures of the earth to rise. As a result, the climate changes, which leads to all types of weather catastrophes. Like I said, and think about this, global warming leads to snowstorms, drought, and I've actually heard scientists try to prove that hey, yes, the Earth is warming, and it's led to these polar vortexes and all these unbelievable cold snowstorms, drought, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, etc. The global warming alarmists contend that more CO2 humans emit into the atmosphere, the more the planet heats up. And they frantically warn that if this is not stopped, we're going to destroy the planet. So is any of this really happening? Well, the answer is no. We're not putting off enough emissions to affect the atmosphere. It's such a minuscule amount. It has nothing to do with hurricanes and tornadoes and all this other stuff. None of that's true. As a matter of fact, most scientists do not agree with this man-made global warming theory and have offered sound scientific data debunking the myth. And so let me give you just a few proofs. Here's just a few of the many proofs that have been provided. Now, there are a plethora, there are books written on this stuff that it's not the case. But that's not what you've gotten through the media. So let me give you number one proof. They say that temperatures increase with the amount of CO2 that's put into the air. That's not true. Temperature increases, they say temperature increases the CO2. But no, it's vice versa. In his now famous global warming documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, former Vice President Al Gore produced a graph. And I know this is a simple example, but I want to keep it simple. I'm not going to go real deep into the science today. I'll keep it simple, but I want to make sure you're getting it. So Al Gore in his Inconvenient Truth movie, so I don't want to cut this one short. I want to make sure you get this proof. So when we come back from the break, I'll give you 3 specific proofs that global warming, climate change is simply not true. And then I'm going to get off into what some of the scientists say pertaining to this. I'm talking about world-renowned scientists, the leader of scientist wings of a university. What do they say about global warming, climate change?
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter, the new book by Irvin's grandson, provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your connection to God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real-life change. Order this brand new book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and leave them in doctor's offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So many of you will remember the documentary of former Vice President Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. In it, he produced a graph depicting the variations of temperature and the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere over the last, according to him, 650,000 years when you looked at computer-generated models. In the graph, Al Gore strategically separated the two lines and placed the temperature line below that of the CO2 line. And this was done in an attempt to create the delusion that when the CO2 emissions increased, that the temperature automatically followed them and began to climb as well. Well, Mr. Gore's obvious conclusion was that the global warming was being generated by mankind's modern industrial development, which has increased the amount of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. And if you watch the movie, you can go, I think it's online, you can go watch it. I mean, these things were like several feet apart. So you really couldn't tell what was going on. Well, as a solution, of course, Mr. Gore advocated global laws that would revolutionize our lifestyle, redistribute the wealth of the world through his proposed cap and trade legislation, putting a cap on the amount of carbon emissions that a factory could emit, and establish a system of global governance that would end national sovereignty. You get that? I mean, he was pushing for a world government to manage all of this because they say it's a global problem. However, the experts analyzed the graph by placing the CO2 line directly over the temperature line, and they proved conclusively that the CO2 levels had risen only as a result of the increase in temperature, not the other way around. So the temperature went up and then CO2 levels followed. It was not an increase in CO2 and then the temperature, it was the other way around. So a closer look at the graph revealed that the lag time between temperature and CO2 levels, the temperature started rising, then the CO2 levels started changing, was as much as 800 years apart. Well, of course, he didn't want you to know that when he made the film, so this one proof alone, it has destroyed the entire basis for the global warming theory. Now, that's just one proof. And an increased amount of CO2 does not result in global warming. That is the lie that you are being fed by the media. That is simply not true. Actually, the opposite is true. Temperatures have risen, then CO2 starts to rise. So, proof number two, because I want you to hear some of these scientists, people that have been claimed to be deniers and just, they don't know what they're talking about. I want you to hear some of them. I'm talking about world-renowned scientists because I want to prove to you that this is propaganda so you can know the truth. Proof number two, that CO2 has risen at a record rate for over a decade, but global temperatures have maintained the same. Well, according to an article by James Taylor in Forbes magazine, the U.S. Department of Energy revealed in its estimates of global carbon dioxide emissions back in the year 2010 that since 2001, so just about a decade, carbon emissions had increased 33% globally, and yet the Earth's temperatures had remained the same for over a decade. He went on to say that the fact that global temperatures are not rising despite such a significant increase in carbon dioxide emissions provides validation of skeptical arguments, not a cause of heightened alarm. He was saying it's simply not an emergency type situation. Don't worry about it. CO2 emissions do not cause temperatures to rise. That's the propaganda, simply not the case. Proof number three, the medieval warming period. Many of you are familiar with that. You remember it from high school, the medieval warming period, if you went back through some of that stuff. Global warming alarmists attempt to explain away the medieval warming period by stating that perhaps they were isolated areas of warming on the planet. However, there were too many easy to understand proofs. So let me give you an example. And I think me and Irvin have given you this many times on the program, but this is so easy. During the medieval warming period, the Vikings sailed at that point in waters that are now frozen. The Vikings took advantage of the ice-free seas to colonize Greenland and other outlying areas to the far north. So around 1000 AD, the climate was sufficiently warmer for the north of Newfoundland to support a Viking colony that came to be known as Vinland because of the fine grapes and the wines that were produced there. These areas are under ice today. It was warmer back then than it is today. This is just another proof, an absolute proof, that it was warmer then than it is now. And think about it like this. This is what the global community, international community wants to put regulations on our factories, SUVs and things, the amount of carbon emissions. They had nothing to do with this back then. It was warmer back when the Vikings were in Greenland than it is now. They had no factories. They had no SUVs. So what's the conclusion? Global warming was not man-made then. It was warmer then than it is now, and it's not man-made now. So one of the things I'm excited to tell you today is what some of the scientists say. Because, and this is very important, because on June 22nd, 2012, the USA Today published an article titled, and a lot of people were swayed by this, but you got to watch what you read or listen to on the nightly news. You've got to make sure you understand what's behind all of this, because I mean, let's just be honest. Most of the media is bought and paid for. They're pushing the agenda of the people that own the news stations and the media sources. So you've got to really do your research. So back in June of 2012, the USA Today published an article titled, and I've heard Obama say this many times, former President Obama, 97% of the scientists say man-made climate change is real. Now, if you hear that, USA Today seems like a reputable news source. You would say, well, there it is right there. 97% of the scientists say man-made climate change is real. In the article, author Doyle Rice stated nearly all the experts agreed that it's very likely that anthropogenic or man-made greenhouse gases have been responsible for most of the unequivocal warming of the Earth's average global temperature in the second half of the 20th century. And as for the 3% of scientists who remain unconvinced, and this is very important because I'm going to talk about some of these scientists throughout the rest of my program. As for the 3% of scientists who remain unconvinced, the study found that their average expertise is far below that of their colleagues. Here's my question to you. Is that a true statement? I mean, it was in USA Today, so come on. Well, so what I want to do is I want to share, just for a little while, a few of the opinions of those below average scientists concerning the man-made global warming, climate change propaganda. So let's start with Will Happer. He's a Princeton University physicist, former director of energy research in the Department of Energy, and also the Trump administration just recently added Will Happer, who's a vocal critic of the mainstream climate science, to the White House as a top advisor, just I think over the last couple months or so. This is what he had to say. He said, I had the privilege of being fired by Al Gore since I refused to go along with his global warming climate change alarmism. He said, I have spent a long research career studying physics that is closely related to the greenhouse effect. And he said, fears about man-made global warming are unwarranted and not based on good science. Now these guys, the guys I'm going to reread, these are the upper echelon. And you'll see that as I go down through here. He said, global warming, climate change, it's unwarranted and not based on good science. The Earth's climate is changing now, as it always has. There's no evidence that the changes differ in any quantitative way from those in the past. Now that's Will Happer. Dennis Hollers, he's an astrophysicist. He said, what I do with the IPCC, the IPCC is the International Panel on Climate Change. These people are on staff with the United Nations. He said, what I do with that report is to put it in the trash. And because that's what all it's worth. Carbon dioxide was an insignificant component of the Earth's atmosphere, and that rather than being a purveyor of doom, it's currently viewed as today, it's needed in order for plants to grow. It's plant food. And he says Mars, the planet of Mars atmosphere is about 95% CO2 get this, and has no global warming. It's warmed by the sun, but the CO2 emissions aren't causing the global warming. You see what I'm saying here? Let me give you some more. Bob Ashworth, he's a chemical engineer. He holds 16 U.S. patents. He's written 55 technical papers. He's with the American Geophysical Union, and he authored a 2008 technical analysis of global warming. Now, remember what USA Today said. The guy in USA Today said these guys are not in the upper echelons of their field. Well, this gentleman had to say the lesson to the world here is, when it comes to science, never blindly accept an explanation from a politician or a scientist who have turned political for their own private gain. Taxing carbon will have absolutely no beneficial effect on our climate. It will hurt the economies of the world, and it will be harmful to the production of food, because less carbon dioxide means reduced plant growth. Because CO2, we take in oxygen, give off CO2. You know that plants take in CO2, give off oxygen. See what I'm saying? But yet these guys are at the lower echelon of their field. Well, let's go to Fred W. Decker. He's a professor of meteorology at Oregon State University. He said there's no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will in the foreseeable future cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. He went on to say, moreover, that there is substantial scientific evidence that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural plant and animal environments of the Earth. Let's go to Vincent Murad. He's a professor emeritus of the Aerospace Engineering and Research Gas Dynamics at the University of Kansas. He said the new green left, or the environmentalist, propaganda reminds me of the old red left communist propaganda. The dirty word is now carbon rather than capitalism. And he said the game is simply to intrude and control everything. That was his take on the global warming climate change propaganda. Chris Landsea, he's a former, now get this, the IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, with the United Nations. I'm going to hold here because I want to make sure you get this quote from a former IPCC scientist and what he had to say about the global warming climate change scam, the hoax, the propaganda being put out by the United Nations. Why? They want to keep all of us in fear mode so they can establish a global governing body to manage all of it.
If ever people needed to hear the unvarnished truth, it is now. There are some subjects that are not politically correct to talk about, but they're urgent. That's why I'm grateful for Endtime magazine. If you're not a subscriber, you're missing information that will impact your life. Endtime has a bi-monthly magazine that explains how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. You can get a 2-year subscription for only $29. You can also get a bulk subscription and pass them out to your church. We have gotten reports that Endtime magazine has caused spiritual awakenings in churches when they see the prophecies being fulfilled right now. You can start your own ministry and lead them in doctors' offices, libraries, laundromats. You never know if you might be responsible for saving someone who is searching for the unvarnished truth. That's what the magazine has done in many lives. Call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 and get your subscription today.
So with Chris Landsea, this is another, one more scientist. I'm not going to get it through all my scientists. I've got many of them that disprove and do not agree with the human-induced global warming. But Chris Landsea, who is a former IPCC scientist, he did work for the International Panel on Climate Change. He said, I personally cannot, in good faith, continue to contribute to a process of the IPCC process that I view as being both motivated by preconceived agendas and being scientifically unsound. He doesn't work for the IPCC any longer. Now, that's just a few of the scientists that these guys said that the 3% that don't agree with this human-induced global warming propaganda, that they're at the lower end of their field. They're not really professionals. These guys are leaders of college science programs and the top in their field. And I wanted you to hear about that, because if you just believe what you're getting on your nightly news, you can get brainwashed over time and not really know the issues. So what's this all about? The Bible says there's going to be a world governing body in the end, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. What's this global warming, climate change scam, hoax all about? Because in some of the debates I've seen between politicians here in the United States, some of them are saying, I believe in climate change, but I don't believe in human-induced, human-driven climate change. That's a hoax. Other people are saying, oh, no, the science is settled and there's global warming which leads to climate change. But I want you to know the truth behind all of this. So let's talk about the global government, driving humanity into world government. How does this all tie together? After World War II, the United Nations was founded as an international organization to maintain peace and security by developing friendly relationships between nations and promoting social progress. So the idea behind this institution, it sounded great. And until it was discovered that the charter establishing the UN was drafted by a convicted communist spy, Alger Hiss. And not one word of that charter has ever changed. They're still operating under that charter today. So you wonder why they're socialistic? That's why. So with a communistic agenda driving the mechanics of the organization, well, it's easy to see how the global elites have been able to work from within the UN to quietly build a world government. And we're watching the establishment of that now. A socialistic world government is the goal, and promoting the belief in global warming is the number one vehicle to reach that goal. If not the number one of the top 2 or 3. So one of the core belief systems of socialism, you say, well, how's that? One of the core belief systems of socialism is that most conflict in society stems from an ever-broadening gap between the wealthy and the poor. Read Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, the haves and the have-nots. So the contention is that the wealthy are the ruling class and will inevitably use their economic power to enforce their will upon the less fortunate. The ultimate socialist solution to that problem is to abolish private property ownership, for the state to own all principal means of production, with the central government redistributing the wealth evenly among the masses. And, of course, the result would be a classless, communistic society where the global government would ensure equality for all citizens. And you say, well, I don't believe people think like that. Well, think again. There are many people in the world that are driven by that ideology. And it would be impossible to fully realize the dream of a communistic one-world government without the redistribution of wealth from the developed nations to the poor, underdeveloped nations of the world. Okay, well, this is where global warming climate change comes in. This is the main goal of the global warming climate change hoax. The United Nations elites know that a perpetual global life-threatening crisis, remember I talked about fear, using fear to control the masses in the beginning. They need this perpetual global life-threatening. They got to keep everybody in fear mode continuously. They need that crisis, and that it's necessary to convince wealthy nations to accept punitive costs of cap and trade taxes, and that redistributes the wealth. So, wealth redistribution is exactly what carbon trade and tax laws are designed to accomplish. So if you hear a politician say, well, we want a carbon tax, things like that, it's socialism. It's wealth redistribution. That's what it's all about. Because the problem, the crisis, is a hoax. But yet when they want to place carbon cap on carbon emissions and charge them for so much a pound, or I think that's how, no, so much a ton, and give that money to underdeveloped nations, they're redistributing wealth. It's a cycle. and it's socialistic. So, and that's why the governments will want to set, these globalists want to set a cap and trade on the amount of carbon emissions that an industrialized nation can emit. If the limit is exceeded, carbon credits can be purchased from underdeveloped nations who have no more credits than they need. That's socialism 101, wealth redistribution 101. So remember, I've proven to you today conclusively that CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. I gave you 3 specific proofs. But global warming fear-mongering. Now, most politicians will not say global warming to save their life now because it's political poisoning. But they say climate change. So we were global warming. Now the name has changed. Climate change, because people can't grab a hold of that one. And so global warming fear-mongering is simply a scheme put together by global elites to redistribute the wealth of the world and to move us into a world government. That's the goal. Global warming is only one of the messages being used to force the nations of the world into this world government. It's a big part of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a blueprint by the United Nations to govern the planet. So think of it like this. Anytime you hear the terms global governance and their propaganda like Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, sustainable development, nationalized health care. A lot of politicians are pushing nationalized health care, social justice, a national identification program. Anytime you hear any of that, world government, nationalized health care, socialism, progressivism, democratic socialism. You think world government because the world government is pushing that. Now, if you say, well, I'd like to live under a world government, I think that's a good idea. Then that's what the kind of leaders that you would want. But if you say, I don't want anything to do with that, then you've got to make your decision from then on. Because the Bible says that the Antichrist will take over this world governing body, and he's not going to be a very nice person. He'll be many times worse than Adolf Hitler dreamed of being. So you've got to know the big picture behind all of this. I'm sitting there watching the 60-minute interview between Leslie Stahl and Donald Trump, and she's saying, you don't believe in climate change? You don't believe? She's bought into this. And that's the first question she asked Donald Trump during the 60-minute interview. And I'm watching that going, you've got to be kidding me. But it's propaganda, folks. And it's global warming, or should I say climate change, that is presently the poster child being used to frighten everyone into giving up freedom in order to save the planet. So, I think that former governor of the state of Washington, many of you will remember her, Dixie Lee Ray. She probably summed it up best when she said the objective clearly enunciated by the leaders of UNCED, or the United Nations Conference on Environmental and Development. She said that they probably summed it up best. It's to bring about a change in the present system of independent nations. The future is to be world government with central planning by the United Nations. Fear of the environmental crisis, whether real or not, they don't care whether it's real or not. They just need the crisis to scare you, she said, is expected to lead to compliance to this world governing body. So, here's the goal at the end of the day. Compliance to a communistic world governing body is the goal, and the global warming climate change deception is the life-threatening crisis that the United Nations has chosen to get there. Remember that President Obama actually said, because climate change is not a hoax. I agree, climate change is not a hoax. Human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, is. So if somebody says, are you a climate change denier? No, I'm not a climate change denier. I believe the climate's going to change every day, and it always has. But humans, the scare tactic that's being put on everybody, humans are not putting off enough carbon emissions to warm the planet to where all this weather catastrophes are happening. God has control of all of that. You see, what happened is they've taken God. World government takes God out of the picture. The United Nations, totally a humanitarian organization. God's not in the picture at the United Nations. They believe in human solutions. But here's the deal, and I'm saying thankfully, for those who are paying attention. That's why we come on here all the time and we say, hey, you've got to get the big picture of this. Let's step back. You can't see the forest for the trees. Let's step back, look at what's really going on. For those who are paying attention, none of this is surprising because the Bible prophesies the establishment of a world government just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And observing the rapid rate at which the prophecies are being fulfilled, that event, the second coming of Jesus Christ, can't be very far off. So it's important that we understand when you see a politician or a news article or the media feeding this lie, or I just read where the International Panel on Climate Change gave out a new report, and the Washington Times ran an article that said, here's why you can't trust this report that was just put out by the International Panel on Climate Change. I was glad that I saw the report. The Washington Times put it out. And so you can't trust those reports. Those are politically motivated reports. And so it's very important that you understand the Bible prophesies a world government. And all throughout time, pharaohs, kings, politicians, presidents, religious leaders even, have used the fear factor, the emotion of fear to rule their people. If you can get them afraid enough. That's why you hear the sensationalistic messages going out of there's this planet that's going to hit the earth or this, that, and the other. God's got control of all of that. The main thing we need to do is understand the prophecies of the Bible, understand what's coming, and keep our hand in God's hand. That's the most important thing. You don't have to worry about all this other stuff. You do God's business, He'll take care of your business. So you can go out, run your factory, drive your SUV. Don't worry about global warming, which leads to climate change. We do believe in climate change. We don't believe in human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change. That's the propaganda, so you don't have to be in a fear mode. Make sure you make your decisions correctly going forward.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.